everyone. I'm your host, Mamadou Barry, and you are on the Barry Media Show. The Barry Media Show is all about entrepreneurship, creation, and leadership. It is the place where guests talk about their skills, challenges, experiences, and success. It is also the place where guests talk about the meaningful and affirmative contribution they provide to the African continent, the African diaspora, and to the world. My next guest is Brian Bogert. Brian is an actor, a stand up comedian, and a business consultant. Originally from Austin, Texas, he abandoned his corporate life to move to Los Angeles to realize his lifelong dream of working in the entertainment industry. While performing at open mics and showcases at night, by day he helps train sales teams to hit their goals and coach managers on the best practices for getting the most out of their customer service representatives. In this interview, Brian talks about his experiences as an actor. He got his start at a very young age. He also talks about his challenges as an actor and stand-up comedian. Insightful interview for those who want to learn more about the entertainment industry. You can find Brian Bogert in the HBO film Tejano, currently streaming on HBO app. Brian is a fun person. I am delighted to have him on the show. Here he is, the charismatic Brian Bogert on the Barry Media Show. Thank you for your availability for this interview, Brian.
Hey, it's no problem. It's kind of like, it's what I was thinking, but the whole world is kind of on a standstill right now. And it's not a bad time to just kind of take a step back and assess what your priorities are, what you're trying to accomplish. And that's definitely what, I've kind of been doing my own version of that while the rest of the world is panicking outside. When a new pandemic goes around and you don't know the symptoms, you don't know how it's transmitted, that's obviously scary. Yeah. But at this point, we do know the symptoms. We do know how it's transmitted.
Exactly. Los Angeles is a tough place to live, isn't it?
It can be. I think if you're just not suited for it does require a specific lifestyle. There's just an attitude that prevails in Los Angeles that's kind of like it's almost like a very polite eat or be eaten. People tend to be okay with each other. But it's a jungle out there, and the people here, are very self-interested. They're all looking out for their own self-interest. So as long as you're cognizant of that, it's its own value for value proposition. People in LA are okay with you as long as you intend to provide some value to them, and kind of the other way around. So it can be a tough place to live in those regards. And of course, there's a lot of traffic. It's huge and sprawling, so you're having to drive a lot to go from one place to another. So by that definition, it can be difficult, but it is well suited for the things that I'm trying to accomplish right now. So that's why I ultimately pulled the trigger on I'm moving to LA from Austin. The LA experience is different depending on what neighborhood you're living in. That's part of its charm.
So what makes you want to move from Austin to Los Angeles?
The funny thing, all things equal, Austin is my favorite city in the world. It's home. My friends and family are there. And that's partly why I had to move, was because I had lived there my entire life. So I knew everybody in Austin. I couldn't go out without running into people from either my current professional life or just a past life or from college, wherever it was going to be. So you kind of got the sense of feeling a little bit claustrophobic being in my hometown. Two, I have always, I do have an acting career, and you can never make it big in the place where you're from, because everyone watched you grow up. So they're never going to get that image of you out of their head. And you're the hometown kid too. So that's just kind of, all of a sudden that's your identity. And there are just things in my stand-up and in my life that I wanted to talk about. But while I was in Austin and I had people close to me come to my shows, there were things that I just didn't want to say, or things that I didn't want to phrase a certain way to upset them. But that's not a healthy way to do stand up. You know, you really have to let all your guard down and be 100% honest, which I couldn't be in Austin. So part of that was, yeah, I needed a change. I needed to not live in my hometown for once in my life. I did want to further my acting and stand-up career and see what other, you know, and I got a job before moving out here. So I wanted to see what kind of professional opportunities I could create for myself. And now here I am starting my own business. And then, yeah, I wanted to live in a place where I could just be a little bit honest with myself and assess what it is I'm really looking to get out of this life.
What is life like in Texas in general?
Texas is, I think, different from how a lot of people understand it to be. I love Texas. I love Austin. A lot of people have issues with so I was talking to my roommate about this yesterday. He's from Idaho. And he's Indian. He's one of, you know, very few people of color in Idaho, right? So he has his own unique perspective of what it's like to live in middle America, as one of only a handful of immigrants in this area. My mom's an immigrant from Cuba. So she immigrated to Texas. So she went from Cuba to Mexico and from Mexico into Texas, then settled in Austin. She met my dad, who's from New York, in Austin. So they kind of had they both met in the middle, settled down, met each other at night school and had me. So, yeah, all that to say, Texas the people there are just great. The people there really do look out for each other. They want people to feel welcome. Austin is an exception, you know, to the rule. The rule being Texas. Austin is its own special kind of exception because it does tend to be more liberal. There is a really large tech sector on the upswing. It has a very accessible downtown that you can just walk around. You know, Austin is a very walkable city, so it makes you feel close to the people there. I mean, you know, Austin is just my favorite city in the U.S., so it's really hard for me to talk about it without, you know, just littering it with my own opinions. Oh yeah, but yeah, sorry to get off track. But my roommate, he's a stand-up too. He's also a comedian. We met doing a comedy festival together in North Carolina, in the North Carolina Comedy Festival. So we met there, and while we were there, we both decided that we wanted to move out of our place, out of where we were. And he was from Portland, Oregon. So he's from Idaho. He was living in Portland, was doing well in Portland. And then we're both kind of like, we need to move to a bigger city. So we kind of made the commitment to move to LA together. And now here we are. But we were talking yesterday. We were going to the beach. And he's like, you know, what is Texas like? And I was like, you know, you'd be surprised, but Texas is a lot more socially liberal than people give it credit for. But you do have conservative values that exist there. Conservative values that I don't necessarily disagree with at all. But the political structure in Texas manipulates those, you know, certain people to vote conservative. And then, of course, there's the gerrymandering lines that exist in Texas that make it look more conservative as a state than it actually is. So, you know, when you have people who are manipulating others for votes on the right side or, you know, whatever you want to call it, or, you know, for Republican votes, and then they gerrymander the state to really exclude minority communities and immigrant communities and try to make the white vote count more so, you know, then it paints a certain picture of Texas that is not as accurate as you might think. Because I think if you did have a conversation with the average Texan about social liberty, they would agree with pretty much everything you'd have to say, you know?
So how did you get into acting? Like, what made you love acting, though?
So my first role I got when I was maybe 6 years old, and it was in a musical, in an elementary school musical. And then, you know, it just never stopped. It never stopped. So my cousin was a campaign advisor for David Dewhurst, who was the former lieutenant governor of Texas. And so, yeah, speaking of politics, I think my first true acting job was a commercial in a political ad. And in the commercial, he points at a computer, and it's one of those 90s Dell computers. So he points at it, and it looks down at me, and I look up at him, you know, to show that he's big on education. And so that was like when I was 6. And then I just grew up doing musical theater, improv, drama club. Went to, I went to an acting institution at Northwestern. I got my degree from the University of Texas in acting. And then after a few years after graduating, that degree yielded the kind of job opportunities you would expect, which is not many. So I worked on set. I was acting full time, working on set, working on HBO shows like The Leftovers. I was a body double in The Leftovers, and I had a small part in that TV show. American Crime, which is an ABC show, I also worked as a body double and like did some small parts for them too. And then as I was turning 26, my health insurance was about to run out. And so my parents, my girlfriend at the time were like, you need to get a job. So then that's when I joined Main Street Hub, which was then acquired by GoDaddy. So then I became a longtime employee of GoDaddy. And that's where that's where I started applying a lot of, the acting side of my degree to this, to all of this professional expertise that I was learning, and the actual sales process and the actual, and also software sales. Because I had sold going door to door. I ran my own house painting business for a little while when I was in college. So I'd done door to door. I'd done cold calling. I'd been managing projects, but now I was doing high volume phone sales for a social media service, which is just a different dynamic. And I had a really hard time adjusting. I didn't have a very successful start. And I wrote my own article about why that was. So not to get too into it, but I made a lot of mistakes. And then all of a sudden, all those mistakes meant that I was learning. And then learning meant that I was starting to be successful. And then because I was successful and because I had made a lot of mistakes, that made me a good candidate to start leading lunch and learns for teams. So then I'd go on to lead lunch and learns for teams. Then those teams ended up crushing their goals. I ran lunch and learns for departments, and those departments were like 120, 130% to goal, whatever. And so then it turned out that was the most fulfilling part of my job. Wasn't the money I was making or the deals I was closing, but it was helping people and being able to answer their questions competently and knowing that me answering that question was going to help them be more successful. So I just kept getting success stories like that. And then I figured, well, this is the favorite part of my job. I'm about to quit. I'm about to move. How can I keep providing value? So then I did get this job at Tidal Wave, which specialized in the solar industry, as an advertising firm for the solar industry. And that was a startup that I was describing earlier, where it's the two founders and myself.
Got you.
And yeah, as we're doing that job, one thing that I was offering some solar companies was sales training. So those sales training sessions ended up going well. And then I told Tidal Wave, I think the best shot for me to get clients, and also for Tidal Wave, because they do leads and they do CRM auditing and consulting and just whole infrastructure audits. So I said, I think the best way to give you guys clients and do what I love to do, which is train and help people, I'm going to build my own brand, and I'm going to invite companies to put me on retainer for consulting services and custom script writing. And if they need any of the services you guys provide, I'll be happy to refer them over to you. They gave me their blessing. So then I took out this trademark for the sales therapist. I just started posting and providing value any way that I can. And yeah, and I was going to go to South by to get my first round of business, but now I'm going to have to find a different way to do that.
Like, from listening to you, one of the questions that popped to mind is that, what is it like to be a consistently working actor? Like, what does it take?
To be a consistently working actor, you got to be comfortable with the sheer number of inconsistencies that exist in this industry too. So a couple of things. And a lot of people have said, like, I'll bet acting lends itself well to sales. And that's kind of true. But the thing is, like learning acting is kind of like icing on the cake. But the cake is supposed to be your life. the cake is supposed to be, all the things that make you as a person interesting. So my great flaw was, I did grow up acting and taking acting classes and acting school, but it's like I learned the icing on the cake before I learned the cake itself. I feel like I learned how to bake the cake when I was working at GoDaddy and learning a lot of really hard lessons, because sure, I was like a good performer, but sales isn't about performing. Sales is about listening and problem solving. So that was something that like I had to come to terms with, and then I could apply all the fun stuff that I'd learned in my years training. So like just to say how acting ties into to business life, but just from the perspective of my acting career, you just got to be fine with the inconsistencies. For example, I shot a film late 2015. I was 24 years old. I shot this film. It's called Tejano, which is a cartel thriller. And I have family who lives on the Rio Grande Valley here in Texas, where a lot of cartel violence happens. So I stayed with them when we were shooting. And then that film spent years in post-production. So I turned in this performance that I felt good about, but then it didn't premiere until the year 2018. And then it wasn't until a year and a half after it premiered at a film festival that HBO bought it. So now it's an HBO film, but it took 5 years for it to be that way. So even though this is my best acting role, the favorite thing I've done to date in so many ways, it took 5 years just for people to see it. So yeah, when you talk about like advice for actors, my advice is like just do the work, put your head down, do the work, and then you just got to be okay with the inconsistencies and let the opportunities, just take advantage of the opportunities as they present themselves to you, and don't worry about the stuff that you just can't control, because you're going to be worrying all the time.
Yeah, got you. I know you work with a couple of high caliber actors. How is it like working with like these people?
Depends, 100% depends on the actor. But I will say, for the most part, you'd be surprised. A lot of actors tend to be very grateful people. Like a lot of them recognize that they are in rare opportunity whenever they're on set. So a lot of them know that, and they want to pay that gratitude forward. Are you familiar with Liv Tyler?
Yeah.
So she might be one of the most famouses that I've met. I got to play her driver on the HBO show The Leftovers, and she's the most welcoming person. She's very welcoming. She laughs. She laughs at my jokes, which is always nice. And just makes you feel, she really wants you to feel like she's present with you.
Yeah.
And she's just delightful. Like I was driving around and I was like, "Hey Liv, nice to meet you. Sorry, I drank too much coffee this morning." And then she just starts laughing. Later on in the day, we're setting up in a neighborhood in Austin, and one of the houses has like a tire swing in the front yard. And so then she's on the tire swing, and then she goes, Brian, come push me. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm literally pushing Liv Tyler on a tire swing right now. And then at one point too, we're wrapping up a scene that she's in, and it is a scene where she unpins a grenade in the middle of a crowded school bus. So it's a very intense scene. As soon as she finishes that scene, I see her turn to like the assistant director, and she goes, can I buy like a food truck for people? Like, can you just put that on my credit card? Like, can we get a food truck, maybe like donuts for people? Can I buy donuts? And they're like, no, Liv, it's fine. You don't have to. She's like, but I want to. So like, it just depends on who you work with. She's delightful. Regina King, who was in The Watchmen recently, she shoots so many projects in Austin, Texas. And I was lucky enough to be on all of them pretty much. And she's delightful. She's always just being present with you. I just think that's the greatest gift an actor can give, is to be present with someone.
Gotcha. So how is it feels like being on TV and being on movie?
So when it comes to like, I think the bigger distinction is going to be between stage performance and stand-up, or commercials, TV, movies. Like if it involves a camera or if it doesn't. So that's kind of where the line draws as far as what's different. Because when cameras get involved and you're shooting a movie, a TV, TV show or a commercial, and this isn't my line, so I can't take credit for it, but it's like you're waiting at the DMV with famous people because you're just waiting all the time while they set up camera. And then you have a few seconds in between action and cut where you're actually doing some acting. But for the most part, you're just waiting, having snacks, reading a book, and just talking to cast members. So, and of course, I've starred in commercials. I have not really starred in full-length feature movies. I've been like supporting roles for that. So I guess the primary difference is like the smaller the project, the more I tend to have a larger role in it, you know?
Got you.
Yeah. For now. And, but yeah, then the big distinction is life performing on stage and life performing on the camera, because I did grow up doing plays, and musicals and now stand up. So, having that live chemistry with an audience is the distinction. So it's the difference between performing for the instant gratification and the instant reaction of the people who are in front of you. And the flip side of that on camera is performing for people who might find this interesting in 6 months when it comes out, you know?
Got you.
So yeah. And when you're on film, you're kind of like acting for the future. You're kind of acting for the sake of like, oh, this is what it's going to look like when they're editing it. So I'm going to give them something to edit around. Whereas you don't really have that concern when you're on stage.
So what do you find the main challenge like in acting?
It's the same challenge you face in sales is self-doubt and rejection. That's my challenge. I mean, at this point, I've done this for so long. I'm just numb to, and so I don't know. At this point, my whole acting career can go down in flames, and I would just be totally fine with it at this point.
Do you get rejected?
So there's a stand-up joke that I have, right, where it's like I haven't done it in a while, obviously. Yeah, it's like I'm an actor, or outside of like stand-up, I'm also an actor. That's actually a very generous way of putting it. I'm more of an auditioner because I audition a lot, and I hear no all the time. And it's not that I hear no, they just don't call you, but you feel the moment they don't call you. You can almost hear them call someone else. And I don't know if you've ever heard the sound of someone else's dreams coming true, but it's very loud, you know, especially when it's one of your close friends. It's deafening. So that's like a stand-up joke that I wrote years ago, and it just kind of rings true. It's like, you know, all acting is like I have an agent. He sends me an email and he says, you have an audition here. I go to the audition, and if I don't hear back, then I didn't get it. If I hear a couple days later, they want you back for a callback. Great. I go back for the callback. If I don't hear anything after the callback, it's a no. That's fine. If I do, then they say, we loved you. We want to put you on right of first refusal, which means you're one of a handful of people who are on the short list for that part. And then after you are put on right of first refusal, or you're in holding, they say, then you get the notice of congratulations, you've been booked, or sorry, you have been released. So that's kind of how it moves down the pipeline, right? It's like you set a demo, do the demo, they think about it, all that stuff. So it's like there's so many consistencies with that in sales. The biggest challenge of which is to only worry about what you can control. That's the most common underlying theme that I've noticed between sales and acting, and really just life, you know, in any facet, professional, personal. You can only worry about what you can control. You can't try to change the world. You can only react to the way that the world is happening around you. And that's what you can control. And thereby you can change the world through the small actions that you take and how you react to what the world is doing around you. So I've been more at peace since I've adopted that kind of mentality. And my acting career improved when I got good at sales, because I wasn't having to perform so much. I was just confident in what I brought to the table. And if they wanted it, they could cast it, and if they didn't, they didn't have to. And I was at peace with that. So yeah, I do think a lot of it is you just have to be at peace with the factors that exist outside of your control. And funny enough, the casting directors are going to like you more the less you care about if you close this deal or not. You know, the customer cares, or the customer likes you more the less you care about getting your commission, and the casting director cares or likes you the less you care about booking the role. So that there's just so many funny parallels that exist between those two industries that are applicable to all walks of life.
What is like the biggest production company in Hollywood?
It is kind of perspective driven, because you have the production companies everyone knows about, you know, Warner Brothers, Paramount, you know, just like the big five, there are those handful of production companies that everyone knows, MGM. But since I am but the whole industry is kind of moving towards more niche markets. So there's almost like a lot of parallel between what's happening in the entertainment industry and what is happening in the tech industry, where things are just going more niche, a little bit more specialized. So there's like just so many more opportunities to create independent work. So yeah, out of the as far as like size of production companies, yeah, your Paramounts, your Warner Brothers, your MGMs, those are going to be the big ones. But there are a lot of really cool production companies that are just taking their chances on more independent kind of scripts and more cutting edge projects, because they believe, you know, like at the end of the day, the large studios have a certain formula down, where they know if they cast this person, write this generic screenplay, attach these generic tropes and storylines, you're going to make X amount of money. And there are production companies out there that are just bored with that, rightfully so, because everyone's bored with that, who are saying, I think the public doesn't even realize what they want. And they're right. It's like Game of Thrones was one of the most highly successful shows of all time. But if you got a focus group together and said, hey, we want to make a show about incest where all the main characters die, no one would have wanted to see that show until they saw it and they realized, wow, I didn't realize I wanted to watch this show so bad, and now it's like my favorite thing. So there are a lot of production companies out there who are taking chances on stories like that, knowing that people want just more realistic and more relatable content than what they're getting. So you know, Annapurna is a great studio who's financed a lot of great scripts, and they pay their actors well, they pay their crew well, and so there are production companies that are large, and there are production companies that I really respect with the chances that they take on certain projects.
So what is your advice? What advice can you give to anyone who wants to become an actor?
Yeah, the first step really is I guess the first step is ask yourself, what do you want to accomplish from this? When you have that answer, the next step becomes a little bit easier. I think the first step for everyone is to get into student films, is to act in some student films. They're low stakes. You can normally get cast pretty easily. A lot of times they're like looking at casts like certain types, right? And just because student films are largely not paid, usually it's not the most competitive casting call. So you can usually find a spot for yourself. And the true value is, it's like in any business, like half the work is just showing up and being consistent. You're not going to show up to your first day of set, knock out a scene, and then expect the success to happen. It's going to take a while. You know, you got to do that a few times. You got to get to know people. You got to have people get to know you. So I'd say the first step is student films. Once you have a few student films under your belt, that's when you can, you know, have some leeway to get an agent. And your agent is the person, or, you know, management, whatever it's going to be. And they're the ones who will submit your CV to any casting calls that are happening. And then the casting director will see your submission from your agent and then say, hey, yeah, we'd like to see Brian or whoever for an audition. And then you just, you know, It happens at different parts. It happens at different points for everyone. I have friends who are much more successful and much more famous than me, and I'm happy for them, right? And it happened for them back when we were in college or like shortly after college. So it's just the important thing is, take the steps, audition, get an agent, do whatever you got to do. But then once that happens, you can't just stop. You can't give up. I have a friend, very successful, Will Britton, great actor, a good friend of mine who's starred in Richard Linklater's film Everybody Wants Some. He was in Kong, Skull Island. Very successful and good friend of mine. And I'm happy that we get to live in Los Angeles together now. But he still works as a personal trainer. He still wakes up at 4 a.m. every day as a personal trainer, even though he probably doesn't need the money right now. But it keeps him sharp, and it gives people something cool, like, oh my God, I got to train with the guy from this movie. So he never stops. He's never giving up, and that's just such an important lesson for anyone wanting to be in this industry. Is like, you can't just be an actor. People don't want to just hire actors anymore. Like, believe it or not, starting my business makes me more castable in so many ways than just being a good actor. These days, casting directors want to see that I'm also a small business owner. They want to know that I have sales acumen. So the more you highlight things about yourself that don't have anything to do with acting, the more chance you give yourself to be successful in acting. Which, funny enough, like, I know that seems paradoxical, but it's 100% true.
Do you think it's too late for anyone to become an actor?
No, absolutely not. I mean, there was that famous case. There was that woman who was like 90 who was in Black Panther, and she played a tribal elder, and now her phone's ringing off the hook. There's a woman in Tejano, the cartel film that I was in. She plays a drug lord. She was 60 years old when we shot this. She's like 63 now. This was her first ever acting role in Tejano. She used to be a journalist in the Rio Grande Valley. She was a journalist who covered cartel violence and who helped bust cartel rings. And in her first acting role, she plays a cartel drug lord. And her performance was so good and so well received that Robert Rodriguez used her for his next movie. So now in her mid-60s, she's Emma Perez Trevino. Emma Perez Trevino. And now she's blowing up in her mid-60s, So there actually is kind of a demand now for older actors.
If you want to become an actor, you necessarily need an agent, right?
Eventually you need, especially if you're new to it, like Bill Murray doesn't have an agent, but Bill Murray's also been doing this for about 50 years. So he's kind of a special case. But I do think if you're new to this, you do need some representation in the industry just to help navigate you through what this industry is actually like, because perception versus reality are hilariously different things sometimes.
So my question to you is, like, how do you find the right agent?
I would say word of mouth. Word of mouth is very helpful. Yeah, that's largely how I did it. And I'll put it this way: if something seems too good to be true, it probably is. Like if an agent or if agent or manager is gunning for you really hard, and you're a nobody, first of all, be honest with yourself. Like, even though, right, even if you Google me, stuff comes up, but I'm a nobody, right? No, like, people in stand-up maybe kind of know me depending on the market, but I'm a nobody. So if someone came blowing down my door saying, hey, I need you for this, or like, you're the next hot young talent, I'd honestly have to pull myself back and be like, really? I'd have to practice healthy dose of skepticism, because this is a shady industry in a lot of ways, and you can't be too trusting. So, and also, if you are a good enough agent, then you should understand. And if someone's skeptical of you, then you should be mature enough to understand why and actually appreciate that skepticism. You want an actor who is going to react to those opportunities with a healthy dose of skepticism.
Do you recommend anything?
Where they want to go, that's going to really depend on what market you're in, right? So it just really depends on where you come from, because a lot of this stuff is very regional. So like in Austin, I have an agent in Austin, and he manages all the commercials and all the business and stuff that gets shot in the state of Texas or nearby, like Texas, Louisiana, some stuff in LA. Now that I'm in LA, I'm officially in the market for representation in this market. So, but in LA, it's hyper competitive, and they don't take solicitations directly from the talent. So they want me to get my casting director who recommended me for these agencies to reach out directly to them. So that's like my own challenge. But yeah, it's really, it just comes down to like where, what part of the country are you in? Look up local agencies around you, get some good word of mouth, find some like actors meetups. There's stuff like this happening in every market. There I'm sure like Facebook groups, whatever there might be, to meet with fellow actors, and then just get their advice of like, hey, we're both here in this community. What have you heard? And just mingle, just be a person. That's really what they want to see. Like I said, you become more castable the less you talk about acting. Isn't that a funny paradox? But it's true. The less you talk about acting, the more people want to make you into an actor, So it's just, yeah, that's my advice, is go to the actor meetups, be an actor, just be a person around them, and then get to know, their process and what they're looking for and how they manage to like find success for themselves in this industry.
Thank you, Brian, for a great interview. I do appreciate you.
I'm looking forward to doing this again sometime.
Thanks to my guest, Brian Bogard. Watch his movies and TV series. You can find me on Instagram at Barry Medias and on Twitter at Barry Medias. The Barry Media Show provides you with the nuggets you need to become successful. Thank you once again. See you next week.